Once there was a house who fell in love with a bird. This house was tall and empty and had a great many windows. Nobody lived in him because he stood on top of a high hill, way off from anywhere, with no one except the morning to play with, and no one except the sunset to talk with, and no one except the twilight to confide in. There was the afternoon, of course, but the afternoon rarely came near the house, because the afternoon was too busy putting the moon to bed. And there was the night, too, but the night was fondest of wandering, and wandering all among the bright and gentle kinds of flowers which you and I call stars, because we don't know what they really may be. So except for the three friends, the morning, the sunset, and the twilight, this tall and empty house with a great many windows standing on top of a high hill was all alone. Now one day, while the empty house is playing at shadows with the morning and trying to amuse himself and forget how lonely he really was, away on top of the high hill, there was a sound in the air as if 2 or 3 or perhaps 4 white clouds were whispering together. And this sound came nearer and nearer to the house, until the house knew it was the wings of somebody who was flying and flying and flying. And this sound came nearer and nearer the house, until the house knew that it was the wings of somebody who was flying and flying and flying. In a little while the house heard a new sound, which was as if 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 brooks were laughing about a secret. And this sound grew higher and clearer until the house knew that it was somebody singing and singing and singing. The house trembled all over with happiness and listened with all his might and looked everywhere out of all his windows, trying to see who the flying and singing somebody might be. Suddenly, out of the corner of one of his highest windows, he spied a little person floating and floating and floating in the air and wiggling a pair of tiny wings and singing as beautifully as if it were thousands of people to hear her song. This little person was all alone high up in the air over the green world, but her song tumbled gently down through the clouds and wandered everywhere along the green world, making it greener. And as it wandered along the world, this song seemed to be always looking for something or someone. At last the song came wandering, very gently, to the hill on which the house stood, and then the song paused very gently and seemed to find someone or something. After a moment, it began again and climbed slowly and gently up the hill, while the little person floated gently and slowly down and down and down through the air, and the heart of the empty tall house stood quite still as the song and the flying person came nearer and nearer and nearer, for the house knew, all inside of himself, that the song was looking for nobody but him, and that the singing, floating, flying person was coming to see nobody else, out of all the sunlight and all the air and all the world and all the sky, and it was true. Nobody can suppose how happy the house was when all at once the tiny flying person alighted right beside him and said, "May I come live in you?" The house answered very humbly and very happily, "Now I know why I've been very lonely forever and ever in such a long time. It was all for this day. Please live in me and never stop living in me until we both stop living." Then the bird thanked him and promised, and the house made all his rooms beautiful just by feeling happy, and the bird wandered and wandered through all these beautiful rooms until she became so tired that she just went right to sleep in the queerest, quietest, tiniest, tip-top room. When the bird woke up the next morning, she found the house all filled with sunlight, and she knew she was happier than she had ever been before. So she sang to the house, and as for the house, he loved her so much, he washed all his windows and wound up all his clocks and swept all his stairs and finally painted himself all over with fresh, bright, new paint. And by that time, it was toward noon, and he felt hungry and tired. "What shall we have for lunch?" he said to the bird. The bird thought and thought. Finally she said, "Since you're such a beautiful house, and since I love you so much, I should like to fly out and catch some mosquitoes so that we can have a bit of mosquito pie." "That's a fine idea," the house said, "for I'm really very hungry indeed, after painting myself all over new." "I'll be right back," said the bird, and she flew out the window in the house and went up, 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 up into the sweet warm air, singing and singing and singing and singing, while the house looked after her, smiling all happily to himself and thinking, "My, how lucky a house I am after all." But just when he thought she had disappeared, because he couldn't hear her singing anymore, she came hurrying through the air silently, down and down and down, and very gently alighted in the tip-top window and whispered, "Shh, some people are coming." "People," said the house, and he looked out. "I don't see any." "They're coming up the hill," the bird whispered. "Don't you see them?" And as she spoke, it grew dark. The house looked again, and sure enough, he saw 3 people climbing the hill. "By Jove," he whispered, "what shall we do?" "Let's keep very still," the bird whispered, and the house whispered, "All right." And the 2 of them cuddled close to one another and smiled to one another and didn't say anything in the darkness. Then up the road that led to the house came the 3 people, and they all lifted their heads and said, "Ho, look what's here! It's a house, to be sure." And the house never said anything, and the bird kept very still. Then up the hill to the door of the house came the 3 people, and they all cried, "Ho, what's this? A tall house and an empty house and a full of windows house without anybody living in it." And the bird scarcely breathed, and the house never said a word. Then up the steps and through the door and into the house the 3 people came, and they all shouted, "Ho, we own this house, we do, and let anybody tell us differently." But just at this moment, what should happen but all the clocks in the house began striking with such a banging and a crashing as you never heard, and the people all jumped right up in the air with fright, and ran around and out the door and down the hill as fast as they could go, with the house laughing and laughing, and the bird fluttering and singing, and a great deal of sunlight quickly rushing all over the green world. So then the bird flew out and caught mosquitoes until she had enough for a delicious pie, and she brought them back and gave them to the house, who cooked them with a great deal of sugar and made them into a pie. And so the bird and the house each ate 3 big helpings of perfectly delicious mosquito pie, and let me tell you, they felt very well indeed afterwards. Not only that, but no people ever bothered them any more, and so they were as happy together as happy could be. Oh, don't.